there. Now in today's project I'm going to be making this cute pair of joggers. They're made from a knitted fabric, which is also known as a stretch fabric, and I'm using a stretch ribbing in the top. Now that's two different types of fabric, but they both have a stretch. So in this video what I'm going to do is demonstrate how I relax the fabric on the table, and that's so important. When you lay your fabric out to put the pattern on top, you want to make sure that your fabric is nice and relaxed. So take your time when you do that. The next thing I'm going to do is demonstrate the needles. Now you can buy all sorts of needles to go into your overlocker. And I'm going to demonstrate the differences between two types of needles that people often get mixed up. So we've got the ballpoint needle, which is also known as the jersey needle, and we've got the stretch needle, and I've exaggerated that with these two dowels and I've sharpened them up too, so look out for that. And then I'm going to show you the threads that I like to use in my machine. And once I've got my thread and my needle set up, I then make sure I practice, and that's really key. Make sure that you've got your machine ready to sew on your good project, and you need to make sure you practice and practice and practice until you're absolutely happy, and you'll see that I've done that in this video too. So to make something like this actually only takes 10 to 15 minutes, but to prepare your machine might take you a little bit longer. But that's really important because this is going to last a very long time if it's made well, and it's going to look so professional. So let's get to it. Before I start any project, I make sure my machine is ready. So that means taking out all the old threads, giving the machine a good clean, and checking that I've got the right needles in this project. And for this project, I'm using a knitted fabric, and you can see there it's knit. Now with jersey needles, these are ballpoint needles. Their point is actually rounded, a lot more rounded than a stretch fabric. Let me exaggerate what a stretch needle and a ballpoint needle can do to your fabric on this knitted scarf. So this is quite a large knit, which you might sew, but with this exaggerated needle, I've got a sharp point there and I've got a ball point there. So if I use the sharp needle first, what I'll do is I'll work from underneath so we can see the results above. And what I will do is I'll just poke the sharp needle through. You see how it grabs a fibre and then pushes it away. But occasionally what happens is it snags onto one of the threads. And if the force of a sewing machine going quite fast and quite strongly through that, it will break that thread, which is something we don't want. And if it continues to do that, it will ruin this scarf and create holes in that scarf and problems, which we don't want to do. Now, if I was sewing this with a ballpoint needle, what will happen is when I go through, the threads catch, but because it's a rounded end, what happens is the fibres get pushed to the side. So the fibres aren't being pierced and they're not being broken like there. So it gets pushed and then it gets slipped over to the side. So they slip. Now this is wood, so it's got some friction on it, but a nice rounded metal needle, the fibres will just slip down the side, just like a knitting needle, but because this is wood, it's got some friction. So it's tougher to show. But what will happen is, you see, it just slips to the side. But with a sharp needle, it will break and pierce your fibres. Now, some machines ask for the HA1SP needle. HA just means it's a household needle rather than industrial machine needle. And 1SP is just a special stretch needle. Now, if you don't grab those needles, don't worry about it too much. Just make sure you're using the right needle for your project. Now, as for thread, you can use cones or cops. So your cones tend to hold a lot more thread than your cops. You usually get something like 5,000 meters on a cone and 1,000 meters on a cop. The option with the cop is it means it's cheaper, but it also means that you can get a range of threads to match your fabric. And I tend to find that these work really well in overlockers. Cones, because they have a wider spin on them, they tend to create problems on domestic overlockers. Some machines are a little trickier to thread up, like this one, so you might find it useful to invest in some lock threaders like these. They have loops with large eyes in them so that you can feed the threads through the machine properly. Now you'll see this thread came out because it got caught somewhere there. I need to just make sure I thread this one back in. Now, even though I've got a very good stretch, the problem is the tension is looking quite loose. I've adjusted all the tensions to make sure that they are at factory settings, but then I've just realised that the pressure foot dial is quite high, so I've reduced it back down to the 1 centimetre that it should be, and you can see that the fabric is now gathering, so I need to just make an adjustment to the differential feed. So that looks a little bit scruffy, so we need to just practice a little bit more. Just grab a bit more fabric, and you just need to keep at it until you're happy with the result, and I can see that there is no gather there. Take care when you're sewing or overlocking stretch fabric. You don't want to stretch it as you're sewing or putting it through the overlocker. That's why we did the test samples, to make sure that everything was set perfectly for us. If you stretch it, look what happens. So I'm going to just exaggerate the stretch. You won't hopefully be stretching it that much, but can you see what's happened? The fabric's become distorted and it's curled over. Doing that will cause damage to your fabric, but also what happens is when you stretch it as you sew it, you don't get a natural balance or a natural stitch, and then when you go to use it and wear it, it will look saggy and baggy and just very twisted. So make sure that you cut it straight and make sure that you are not stretching as you sew. I'm going to put good sides together, and you can pin or you can clip or you can go freestyle. I'm going to stitch the outer seams first and then the underseam, and then add the ribbing. Now you don't need to worry about locking your stitches at the start and at the ends because they're going to be encased in the ribbing. Okay, so we've got our leggings as they are. I'm quite happy with that. And I've got my ribbing for the top and for the cuffs at the bottom. I've got 1 and 2. If you wanted to make the ribbing out of the main fabric because you've not got anything special, I just had this sitting around, so it was just lucky for me to be able to use this. But if you don't want to use special ribbing, you can actually use the same fabric. Just cut it as wide as you want the cuff to be, and then just a little bit smaller. So I'm just going to stitch down the side, so unfold it and stitch along that side. And then I can just check that's fine, like that. And then all we need to do is attach it to the leg. Now I can see some of the stitching there, so what I want to do is just, I'm going to change this thread to blue. And there we go. So you can barely see the stitches, and even less because they're blue. Okay. Well, you want to stretch your ribbing so that it goes around the fabric. You don't want to stretch the fabric underneath. So I'll pop some pins in there. I'm going to stretch again. Just make sure I'm not stretching the fabric, but I'm just stretching the ribbing like that. And place a pin in there. Okay, so make sure it's all nice and flat. Give it a tug. And then once it's in, it's difficult to see. Okay, so once it's all in there, just take your time and be very careful, because you've got pins that could attack you. And you might miss pins that go underneath. I'm going to leave the needles in as I adjust. And then just go over the first set of overlocking. It looks a little bit wavy here. That's because I've had to stretch as I go, but with a little bit of steam it will be fine. And just lift up your needles and pull this away from the chain like that. Don't pull from the side, pull from the back. And then when you go over the first bit of your stitching, do that for about 1 inch, and then release your needles from the fabric, lift up your presser foot, and then we're going to chain off. Now I left a pin in there, but luckily the pin didn't get caught on the knife. So you need to be careful when you do that. Make sure your pins are well out of the way. Now if I show you now, that's the top of the trousers. Now what you can do here is press that down, sew a double stitch down there, so you get your twin needle on your sewing machine and stitch all the way around there, and that gives you your cover stitch effect.